Scream is one of the most successful horror franchises of all time, but the film's production was chaotic, from last-minute location changes to rating boards attempting to sabotage the film, and the bizarre reason they fired their DP just a week before they finished filming. What were the real-life murders that inspired the film, and why were they forced to scrap the original design for Ghostface and had to fight to keep his iconic mask? Let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Montgomery and welcome to Bloody Good. Today we're looking at how Scream was made and all the changes that were made along the way, and the many roadblocks and challenges they encountered while filming. From bizarre original casting decisions to a completely different actor in the lead role, and the reason directors such as Danny Boyle, George A. Romero and Robert Rodriguez refused to take on the project. Scream was written by Kevin Williamson. Before writing Scream, Williamson had previously written an adaptation of the book I Know What You Did last summer. But in the 90s, the slasher genre was dead, and the script was put on ice. In 1995, Williamson was house-sitting for a friend when he became bored and stuck the TV on to a local news channel, where he learned about a terrifying news story.
Apparently a serial killer is on the loose. In Gainesville, 5 young people have been murdered since Sunday, some horribly mutilated. And haunting memories of another serial killer are beginning to return.
The Florida Gainesville killer was a real-life serial killer, breaking into homes and murdering college students. He would hide in the closet of his victims' homes and call them to ensure they were home. What happened next, though, is what sent Williams into a frenzy. After watching the program, Williams heard a noise from one of his rooms in the house. Upon investigating the noise, he found that one of the windows in the home was open. This sent Williams into a panic. Fair enough. He decided to channel this energy into writing a script. He did what all sane people would do and listened to the Halloween soundtrack and wrote the entire 120-page screenplay in just 48 hours. Williams wanted to make the kind of horror film he wanted to make, and titled the film Scary Movie, with this title later being changed to Scream. The previous name would be adapted later in its parody. The film was then bought by Dimension Films, where they had to find a director who knew horror and could balance the tone of thrills and laughs. The producers approached a number of horror legends, such as Sam Raimi, famed for his Evil Dead series, George A. Romero, the godfather of zombies, and Robert Rodriguez, famous for his low-budget filmmaking in El Mariachi, and up-and-coming Danny Boyle, just a few years before he would go on to reinvent his own section of horror with 28 Days Later. But there was a problem. Williams found that none of the directors could get the correct balance of tone. The directors they spoke to viewed the film as a straight comedy. Yes, at this point in his career, Craven was kind of done with horror, as well as feeling he'd already done a sort of meta-commentary on the genre with his film New Nightmare. But two things changed his mind. First, early on, they were able to cast Drew Barrymore as the main role of Sidney Prescott. More on that later. Which made Craven a tad more interested in the project. But it wasn't until he was approached by a young fan at around the age of 10 who had accused him of going soft. This was the push that Craven needed to say yes to the production, so they were full steam ahead and they began casting. It was vital that they found the right actors for the part, who could balance the tongue-in-cheek tone of the film, along with the horror. For this, they turned to casting director legend Lisa Beach. Now, while they knew this was tough, at least they could take solace in the fact they had already cast their lead. Well, there was a problem. When they originally approached Drew Barrymore to play the lead, she had a different idea. Having already played the lead in previous horror films such as Firestarter, Cat's Eye and Poison Ivy, she knew how much of a slog it was to be the lead in the film. So only agreed to appear in the film as long as she was killed off in the open. However, this was a blessing in disguise, as she was the most famous actor to appear in the film and featured prominently on the poster. So having her killed first immediately threw viewers off as they realized, oh shit, anyone can die in this film. For Sidney Prescott, the role was originally offered to Molly Ringwald, who was Williams' first choice for the role. However, she turned it down due to not wanting to play a high schooler at 27. Reese Witherspoon's popular for her role in films like Legally Blonde and Election was offered the role, but turned it down. Claire Danes was another actress offered the role, famous for playing Juliet in Baz Luhrmann's adaptation, but also turned it down. And Holly Mayer auditioned and even screen tested opposite an actor trying out for Billy Loomis, that actor being Leonardo DiCaprio. Other considerations for Billy Loomis included Joaquin Phoenix, who turned down the role, Justin Whalen, who had previously appeared in the Child's Play franchise, and David Arquette, who would go on to be cast as Dewey, and even Matthew Lillard, who would go on to play the role of Stu. But the way he got the role is a story within itself. Before Matthew Lillard entered the audition, the others who previously went for the role included Freddie Prinze Jr. and once again David Arquette. Matthew Lillard landed the role after accompanying his girlfriend at the time to an audition for an unrelated film. It was only by chance that he bumped into Lisa Beach, who asked him to audition for the part. Other noteworthy mentions include Seth Green, who auditioned for the role of Randy Meeks, almost giving us the cast of Scooby-Doo 2, but the role went to Jamie Kennedy on account of him making Craven laugh with his improvised lines. Courtney Cox had to fight for the role of Gail Weathers. Off the back of Friends, she wanted to play a character that was, quote, a bitch, to offset the nice persona she'd been labelled with the show. And it was the exact reason the studio was cautious of hiring her. However, after much convincing, she landed the role. With the main actors cast, it was time to go to work on the design of Ghostface himself. Themselves? Well, for the design, they wanted to do something along the lines of a drawn, melting ghost. Craven and costume designer Cynthia Bergstrom took inspiration from the famous painting The Scream. This was where Bergstrom and Craven would have their first disagreement. Bergstrom wanted the costume with the mask to be all black, similar to the Grim Reaper, whilst Craven wanted to opt for an all-white look to really add to the ghost aesthetic. While Bergstrom was hesitant about the creative decision, she respected the director's vision and made a mock costume for screen tests. When talking about the process, Bergstrom was quoted in saying, "We put a friend of mine who was a big guy, about 6'2", in the white costume, and he basically looked like a giant Casper the Ghost. And Wes still liked it. And Marianne and I are just kind of looking at each other going, how can we get him away from the white?" It wasn't until a couple of weeks before we started shooting that we really nailed the costume. For the mask, it wasn't until they were location scouting at one of the locations for the film, where previously mentioned producer Marianne was looking at an abandoned house and found a white mask hung on a post. The mask was perfect and exactly what they were looking for, but there was a problem. The mask was owned by the Fun World company. The mask was known as the Peanut-Eyed Ghost, part of a line of Halloween masks called Fantastic Faces. So during this time, Craven enlisted Greg Nicotero, a horror legend you may know from his work on Man of the Dead or The Walking Dead, and Howard Berger from K&B Effects Company, create a version of the mask. However, the production was able to reach a reasonable deal for the rights to use the mask, and after this, it was full steam ahead on the production. Production began on April 15th, 1996. The first 5 days of shooting were spent shooting Drew Barrymore's scenes. In order to get the emotional reaction necessary for the scenes, Craven would recite details of tragic news stories Barrymore had heard involving violence towards animals. For the iconic voice of Ghostface, the production turned to Roger Jackson, with the initial thought that he would simply be a placeholder voice, and he would find a new voice to dub over his lines in post. However, Craven and the producers were blown away with his performance and kept him on as the iconic voice of Ghostface for the whole series. During the production, none of the cast met Jackson until filming was complete. The first 5 days of shooting were incredibly chaotic, from issues inside and outside production. One particular incident was one of the set dressers had forgotten to disconnect the phone used by Barrymore's character in the opening. This led her to really dialing 911 and the operator hearing her screams of terror. They also had a problem coming from inside production, so to speak. Bob Weinstein, brother of disgraced piece of shit Harvey Weinstein, an alleged crooked bloke himself, hated the mask they had fought so hard to get and insisted that they change the mask. Thankfully, Craven and the rest of the producers threatened to shut down production and told him to wait for the opening to finish filming so he could see the mask in action. On completion, he had changed his mind. The next hurdle the film had to face was the location of the school they originally had permission to shoot on, Santa Rose High School, pulled out during the production after seeing scenes that involved language that they felt was unbecoming. This sent the production into a tailspin, forcing them to secure a backup location and film the school scenes at a community center. This is why in the end credits a note is made under the special thanks that reads, "No thanks whatsoever to the Santa Rose City School District Governing Board." Another headache for the film was the Stu's party sequence. The film's 42-minute end sequence was filmed at night over 3 weeks. For Tatum's death, the original idea was for it to be a sequence involving a fistfight and finally ending with the garage door crushing her neck. But it was Williams' assistant who suggested using the doggy door for the death instead. The numerous stunts in the sequence also proved to be a headache, with one incident almost ending in disaster. During the scene where Sidney comes out of the closet and stabs Billy with an umbrella, the stuntman was originally meant to hit the pad on Aldrich's chest. The first hit got the pad, but the second slipped and hit him in the chest. Ulrich's chest has a metal wiring beneath the skin from an open heart surgery he had as a child, which caused him intense pain, and his shocked expression and scream of pain were genuine. Craven ended up keeping it in because of its authenticity. The house made for a difficult location to film in, with the uneven landscape making lighting scenes difficult. Another issue was the amount of extras required to make a believable party scene. These raising tensions only heightened the heated relationship between Craven and Mark Irwin. The filming team were using anamorphic lenses, which Irwin and his team were inexperienced with. When Craven was reviewing footage, he found that whole takes were completely out of focus. Irwin was told this would result in over 35 days of reshoots for the film, and was told he would have to fire his focus puller. Irwin responded that if they wanted to fire one of his team, they'd have to fire him as well. And Craven did just that, with only a week left of shooting. 5 nights were spent on the kitchen confrontation between Billy, Stu, and Sidney. By the time they had filmed Gale returning with a gun, Ulrich said that he and Lilliard were roaming around like caged animals to keep the intensity of their performances high, to the point Craven asked them to relax because they were scaring cocks. The crew were given t-shirts that read, "I survived scene 118, with the crew referring to it as the longest night in horror history. After finishing the initial edit of the film, the rating board slammed the film with a rating of NC-17, basically the kiss of death, making the film incredibly difficult to advertise and distribute. It took over 9 separate cuts to reduce the rating, and Bob Weinstein to tell them to view the film as a comedy. However, it did involve losing a number of scenes, such as Billy and Stu stabbing each other, which was moved to be off-screen, reducing scenes of Casey's hanging body, and editing out frames of the opening slow-mo knife stab, which they originally wanted to have as an alternative take to be used instead, but Craven just straight up lied and told them that they only got 1 take of it. The film was released 5 days before Christmas, with the idea from Bob Weinstein, that crooked bloke, that it would give teenagers something alternative to watch instead of the family-friendly films being released around the time. The decision was unpopular with the cast and crew, who felt it was sealing the film's fate to be a flop. It opened at number 4 with 6.4 million, leading the studio to believe it was a failure, and Variety labelling it dead on arrival. However, something strange happened. The film was receiving positive word of mouth, and each weekend after, it began to make more and more money. Scream remained the top 10 highest grossing film for 9 weeks in total. In the end, the film, with a budget of 15 million, made over 103 million, going on to spawn 6 more films, a TV show, and inspired a whole parody series using its original title, and increased the sale of caller ID devices more than threefold. And if you're interested in how something like Stranger Things was made, and the original plans they had for season 2, click the link on your screen right now. Now, I've been Montgomery, and this has been Bloody Good.